Hitler's command expected a new blow of our troops and took all measures to strengthen its defence. On the Berlin direction, fortifications were intensively built since January 1945, when the Soviet troops launched a broad offensive from the Vistula line. Behind the Oder, the Nazis created a continuous defensive system, including Berlin. The depth of defence reached 100 kilometres. For this purpose, Hitlerites used numerous rivers and canals, lakes, heights and forests, set minefields, wire fences, all kinds of land mines. Villages with strong stone buildings turned into strong strongholds. At the same time, fascists strengthened Berlin, counting on prolonged street battles. Hitler's order on the defence of the city said it is necessary to prepare for street fighting. This fight must be conducted with fanaticism, with the use of deception and cunning on the ground, in the air and underground. In Berlin was being built 3 circular defence circles, outer, inner and central. It is better to surrender Berlin to the Americans than to let the Russians into it, the Nazis insinuated to the soldiers. The prisoners told, as if the officers said with certainty, that the Russians would never succeed in taking Berlin. In those days, Hitler ordered the removal of General Wenck's German 12th Army from the Western Front, where it was operating against the Americans, and its transfer to the Soviet German front. The order was published in German newspapers and broadcast over the radio. Thus, for Anglo-American troops, opened the way to Berlin. And against the 1st and 2nd Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian fronts, the enemy concentrated a large grouping. Together with reserves and Volkssturm, it had about 1 million soldiers and officers. Such, in general terms, was the situation in the enemy camp on the eve of the Battle of Berlin. Spring sunny weather was suddenly replaced by inclement weather. Heavy leaden clouds hung low over the ground. At times it rained heavily on us, water accumulated in the trenches, and our boots seemed ponderous with mud. Before the general offensive on some parts of the front was prepared battle reconnaissance. General Shatilov appointed for this battalion of Capt. S. Blokhin from the 469th Rifle Regiment, the Chief of Staff of the division, Colonel N. K. Darchkov, called Blokhin to the command post of the division. "Your task," he said, unfolding the map to scout the defence system and enemy firepower in the main strike zone of the division. "You are entrusted with a large and difficult task." Blokhin corrected his commander's bag, looked closely at the map with blue lines drawn on it, which marked the enemy trenches, and nodded his head in agreement. "I understand, Comrade Colonel." "Can you manage, Andrei Stepanovich?" the colonel asked with fatherly warmth. "I'll do my best." "I wish you success." Ended the conversation with the Chief of Staff of the division and shook the officer's hand. About this conversation with Colonel Blokhin told me before the start of the reconnaissance. We witnessed hot battle fights. A lot of troubles and worries fell on Blokhin's share then. The night is as dark as the eye can see. You can't see anything within 10 meters. Only over the no-man's strip dazzling flares and fading, scattered somewhere in the darkness. Under the cover of darkness, the soldiers sneak through the passages of communication and occupy the trench. Not far from here, sheltered in deep trenches, sit fascists. They are on duty at machine guns, and at any moment can open a barrage of fire on the fighting order of Soviet units. The whole day officers and sergeants of the battalion together with artillery commanders studied the system of enemy defences. With binoculars and naked eye they looked through every bush, took note of any suspicious place where enemy firing points could be hidden. At the end of the day, Captain Blokhin gathered in his dugout platoon and company commanders. Among them stood out the commander of the 5th Rifle Company, Senior Lieutenant Nigorshkov. Tall, physically developed, he resembled a boxer. Before the war, Nikolai Gorshkov exercised daily with weights and barbells and strengthened his muscles so that his friends wrinkled in pain when he shook hands with them. On his oblong face shone large grey eyes. To match Gorshkov was, and the commander of the artillery battery, Senior Lieutenant N.M. Fomenko. A man desperately brave, has already suffered many frontline trials. For heroism and bravery in the Berlin battles, he received the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Together with other officers, they went along the message to the observation point of our battalion. Andrei Stepanovich Blokhin once again specified the location of the enemy trenches, places of concentration of his reserves, established the order of interaction of rifle companies with artillerymen and tankers. All issues related to combat reconnaissance were resolved, and each commander clearly knew his task. Wishing each other success, the officers dispersed to their units. At dawn, as if by order, the weather was clear, cloudless. Our guns rumbled, heavy howitzers began to talk. A powerful artillery raid began. Soldiers, looking out from behind the barricade, watched the bursting shells. On the clay wall of the trench they made steps to jump out of their hiding place and rush at the enemy. Attack, forward. Senior Lieutenant Gorshkov commanded the soldiers of the company when the artillery transferred the fire into the depth of the German defence. The soldiers jumped out of the trench and rushed to the enemy position. The enemy fire points, not suppressed by artillery, came to life. Here and there heard rifle and machine gun fire. Our infantrymen broke into the first trench. A few minutes passed, and everything was quiet. The company has consolidated on the occupied line. A reconnaissance battle alarmed the enemy. Having pulled up reserves, Hitlerites went in a counterattack. Our soldiers, with a shout of hurrah, rushed at the fascists, crushed them, and on the shoulders of the enemy broke into the second trench. Officer Gorshkov acted side by side with the soldiers. He killed several fascists with the fire from the automatic rifle, but at one of the turns of the trench he himself was hit by an enemy machine gunner. All day on April 15th, with minor interruptions, continued combat reconnaissance. Our advanced units held both trenches until darkness fell. During the night, these trenches were occupied by units of the first echelon of the division. General Shatilov arrived at the place of combat operations. He clarified the breakthrough areas and ordered the artillerymen to move the batteries closer to the infantry fighting order for direct fire. In all units and subdivisions of the 1st Belarusian Front, final preparations for the general offensive were being completed. At night, vehicles with extinguished headlights were coming to the front line. In their bodies was lumpy something bulky, covered with tarpaulin. At 5 o'clock in the morning of April 16th, a vertical beam of searchlight cut through the pre-morning gloom. It was the signal for artillery preparation. At the same second, a formidable symphony of hundreds of Katyushas sounded. They were joined by the volleys of thousands of guns of all calibers. A gigantic crimson glow was formed. It became as bright as daylight. The ground beneath our feet shook. The airwaves were strong and sharp jolts echoed in the ears. Thousands of tons of red-hot metal flew to the enemy positions, ploughing his trenches, passages, destroying pillboxes and bunkers, destroying military equipment and manpower. During the artillery cannonade, Senior Lieutenant Gusev and I were in Captain Guselnikov's company and watched the bursting of shells. The artillery preparation lasted 20 minutes, but for us these minutes remained unforgettable for life. As soon as the artillerymen transferred the fire into the depth of the German defence, a lot of red rockets flashed in the air. Attack. In the company, Guselnikova first jumped out of the trench. Communist Senior Sergeant Sianov. He looked around, with a wave of his hand called for his comrades, and with a rifle at the ready ran after the tanks. Feeling the elbow of experienced front-line soldiers, young soldiers Ivan Baik and Ivan Prigunov acted confidently. It was their first baptism of fire. For the motherland, forward. Rolled across the field. Only now people realized that at night on cars, covered with tarpaulin, to the front line were brought powerful illuminating means. With the beginning of the attack on a wide front simultaneously flashed 143 searchlights and hundreds of tank headlights. Bright light, they blinded the Nazis. It happened quickly, unexpectedly. The enemy was stunned. Strong illumination helped us to see the terrain better. The wire fences were no longer a serious obstacle. Only pieces of barbed wire were lying on the field, and in some places sharp ends of broken stakes were sticking out of the ground. The enemy trenches were crumbling and looked like abandoned and littered ditches. Fire means of the enemy were suppressed. Hitlerites were silent. But we fully appreciated the results of the work of our artillery only with dawn. Here and there lay German guns, some of them remained undamaged, others were broken, and their barrels stuck into the ground. On the way there were countless craters. In the place of the fallen pillboxes, pathetic remnants of rebar and pieces of concrete stuck out of the ground. In the shelters, mangled and collapsed, there were dead horses and mutilated vehicles. On Hitlerites, who miraculously remained alive, it was terrible to look. Some of them went mad. Others, kneeling on their knees, prayed. The battalion advanced about 3 kilometers without encountering resistance, and when we came to the second position, a struggle ensued. The Nazis met us with organized fire. However, companies Guselnikov, Kuksin and Pankratov successfully occupied an unnamed height and, without delay, continued the offensive. I also snuck to the height and through binoculars followed the battle. The offensive was developing successfully. The unnamed height, bushes and a railroad embankment were left behind. We broke through the second position and entered the open countryside. Then from nowhere a squadron of German airplanes appeared over our fighting order. The battalion lay down, but Soviet fighters came up. An air battle ensued. One Nazi plane caught fire, began to run away, leaving a black plume of smoke. The hit machine, gradually reducing speed, began to lose altitude. One less bastard. Meanwhile, our units got up from the ground and moved forward even more rapidly. I moved to a new observation post. As always, Kuzma Gyusvi was already in charge there. He mapped changes in the situation, spoke on the phone with the chief of staff of the regiment. So in a break from us acted Kuksin's company, which knocked out the Hitlerites from the farm, where a lonely 2-story house was visible. There I sent a contact bull. 3 years ago the occupants took him to Germany. Our troops freed the young man from captivity, and he volunteered for the Soviet army. The lad turned out to be an excellent fighter. Soon the contact returned. His slightly freckled face was excited. His voice became raspy from excitement. Captain Kuksin asked me to tell you that the farm near the grove was heavily fortified. In the windows of the brick house and in the cellars there were machine guns and guns, which with their fire prevented the advance. For 2 or 3 minutes I examined the farm with binoculars, and then I called the battery commander to me. Look at the brick house. There are machine guns and cannons beating from the windows. The artilleryman looks carefully. Now they will be silent. And now the artillerymen are firing at the house. Without wasting a minute, Kuksin's company rises to the attack and knocks out the Nazis. The division broke through the enemy defence in the area of Chemnitz and was advancing in the direction of Barnim-Kunersdorf. Our 756th Regiment was in the first echelon. On the roads and right across the fields the Soviet troops were marching westward in an endless stream. Leaving behind them clouds of dust, tanks were moving with a roar, infantry was rushing, artillery and rear units were pulling up. Using strongly fortified strongholds, Hitlerites stubbornly resisted, trying to block the way of the mighty avalanche. Many times they went into counterattacks, but no force could delay the victorious advance of the Soviet troops. Day and night there were continuous battles behind the Oder. On April 17th, compounds advancing to the south of our division won a serious victory. By the middle of the day, Komsomol Guards Lieutenant Katkov hoisted the red flag on the crest of the Zilov Heights. On this line of defence east of the town of Zilov, Hitlerites put the main hope, called it the Castle of Berlin. And this castle is in our hands. Rifle Corps, under the command of General S.N. Perevertkin, was advancing in the direction of the northern outskirts of Berlin. The 469th Regiment, commanded by Colonel Mokolov, occupied one settlement and forced a shallow river. But further his way was blocked by enemy tanks. Battalions suffered losses. It was urgent to counteract the tanks. 76mm guns at direct aim, ordered Mokolov artillerymen. And the battery of guns of Senior Lieutenant N.M. Fomenko, operating in the fighting order of infantry, moved to the hillside. The Germans hit from the side of the gully, reported to the platoon commander gunner Memodam Kasanov. The platoon commander, Junior Lieutenant Ivan Frolovich Klokov, began to scrutinize the sparse shrubbery near the gully and found enemy tanks there. You, Mamodam, have a keen eye, Klotkov said, and gave the command to open fire. The calculations worked skillfully and clearly. The battalion's commander, Sergeant Solia Davlechin, is a calm man by nature, and now he is cold-bloodedly directing the actions of his gun crew. Junior Sergeant Hasanov is pointing the guns, soldiers Fyodor Dotsenko and Ivan Pushnoy are loading the cannon and preparing another shell. Vigorously act soldiers and the rest of the calculations. The target is covered accurately. 3 tanks went up in flames, the rest were silent. The threat from the flank has passed. The offensive of our infantry resumed. The next day, the 469th Regiment encountered a new enemy defensive line. The attack from the start gave nothing. Companies did not advance a step. Major Vladimir Markovich Taitar, the regiment's chief of staff, experienced the failure with pain and frustration. "It's my fault," he said to the commander. "The enemy was poorly recognized, did not properly scout his firepower. And what if we go around?" Taitar suggested, "We'll take 2 companies, we'll go through the swampy area. The enemy won't expect us there. We'll cross the river and suddenly attack the Germans from the rear. May I personally lead the men?" "Go, Vladimir Markovich, but be careful, do not take unnecessary risks," replied Mokolov. With great difficulty, the company overcame the swamp and, unnoticed, approached the river, and there was no time to rest, and Taitar was the first to rush into the water. We safely crossed to the opposite bank. A sharp and unexpected raid stunned the enemy. Our soldiers, having broken into the trench, destroyed the confused Hitlerites by fire of automatic rifles, bayonets and rifle butts. And now the trench is occupied. But a battalion of fascists with 7 self-propelled artillery units went into counterattack. To let the self-propelled vehicles through and to cut off the infantry, ordered Taitar. He went down to the bottom of the trench and, when the German vehicles passed overhead, lay down behind the machine gun. But Taitar was wounded in the arm. Overcoming the pain, he rose from the trench and led the soldiers in the attack. He received another wound, this time fatal. "Goodbye," our favourite, said General Shatilov, when he was reported about the death of Taitaria, and many who were at the NP division, for the first time saw how the general's face rolled tears. After the war, the major's remains were transported to Berlin, where a monument was erected to the glorious warrior. Major Vladimir Markovich Taitariu was posthumously awarded the knowledge of the hero of the Soviet Union. The midday sun was burning hot. The hot air was saturated with dust. A grey layer of it settled on their faces. Their uniforms were darkened with sweat. In the middle of the day, ahead of the battalion, I climbed a low hill. Lieutenant Berest, wiping his sweaty face with a handkerchief, pointed to the plywood nailed to a peg. "See the footprints of our scouts." On the plaque, someone had written in gaunt, sprawling handwriting to Berlin 40 kilometers. We stopped, looked at this sign, made hastily by the hand of an unknown soldier, and began to watch. In the distance behind the hill there was a wide field. On the horizon vaguely loomed the village of Kunersdorf, covered from above by a cloud of black and blue smoke. In some places fires were raging in the village, which from afar looked like large blazing fires. The outskirts of the village arc around the canal. It became known that in Kunersdorf gathered selected Hitler's units, formed from cadets of military schools. "The Russians have been here before. We're walking on well-travelled paths," said Berest. "Tell me, Alexei, what you know about it," I asked him. "Oh, friends, I used to read a lot, and was especially fond of Suvorov's campaigns. Hear and shine your knowledge, I half-jokingly suggest him." "Remember this date, summer of 1759, began Berest. "Then on this land there was a famous Kunersdorf battle, which took the first baptism of fire Alexander Vasilievich Suvorov. In that battle, the army of the Prussian King Frederick II, and it was considered the best army in Western Europe, was defeated by our ancestors. Frederick II on the battlefield lost his hat, almost got captured, and from shame wanted to commit suicide. The king was scared to death and wrote in a report to his residents that everything was lost. It was necessary to save the court and archives. The Prussians fled in panic, throwing banners and cannons. You know, of course, that Russians visited Berlin at that time, and the keys to its gates are still kept in our museum. And then, half a century later, ours once again marched through the German capital when they finished Napoleon's troops. Now we have to enter Berlin for the third time. You remembered the story, by the way, I said. It must be told to all soldiers at the first opportunity. By decision of the division commander, we were to surround and take Kunersdorf with the forces of 3 regiments. Our 756th Rifle Regiment is advancing from the north on the open ground, which is far viewed by the Nazis. On the outskirts of Kunersdorf, first of all, it was necessary to cross the canal. Our battalion was advancing in the main direction of the division. There was intense preparation for battle. Pulled-up tanks, artillery, in companies petty officers gave the soldiers ammunition. Political workers, agitators held conversations with the soldiers. Among the soldiers were, and the regiment commander Colonel Zinchenko. Beat the enemy in the Suvorov way, he urged. Before evening, our tanks, supported by artillery, went on the attack. They moved down a gentle slope, approaching the canal. Each fighting machine was visible to the enemy as on the palm of his hand. The Nazi self-propelled Ferdinand opened a targeted fire. One tank smoked and began to slowly turn on the spot. The next moment, a sheaf of fire burst from another vehicle. Several more Nazi shells hit the target. The Germans repulsed the tank attack. At night, we took up the defence in front of the canal to begin the general assault of Kunersdorf tomorrow. Taking advantage of the darkness, scouts found the most suitable area for the crossing. Obviously, the canal was dug long ago, its banks crumbled, overgrown with bushes, branches hanging down into the water. Early in the morning, when white fog was floating along the canal, the artillery of the division made a powerful fire attack. The battalion began to cross the canal. While the rifle companies were crossing to the other side, the sappers were setting up pontoons. The enemy desperately resisted. When a battery of horse-drawn 76mm guns was crossing the bridge, a shell exploded nearby. One of the sledges rushed to the side and dragged the cannon and its crew into the water. The bridge tilted, and 2 more crews were in the water. A traffic jam was formed. The guns sank, but the crossing continued. Under cover of artillery fire battalion forced the channel. I give the signal attack. All 3 companies rise at the same time. Shooting on the move, with a shout of hurrah, run forward, many fell. You can hear the groans of the wounded. Revived Hitlerite fire points are frantically firing. The attack again failed. The battalion lay down. Heavy battle unfolded not only in the area of our battalion. The division commander saw it and understood the complexity of the situation. To support the rifle units, he additionally allocated tank companies, artillery divisions, including 1 division of Guards Mortars Katyusha. I ordered over the phone to the commander of the machine gun company, Nevada Samsonov, crawl with your company as far as possible along the plantations and machine gun fire to ensure the attack. Only, God forbid, do not go to the arable land there. Samsonov understood. I'll do everything, comrade captain. Come on, fellow countrymen, go. And so a new attack began. Here I'd like to emphasize Junior Lieutenant Ivan Frolovich Klochkov. He rolled out his 76mm guns on direct aiming and from the first shots destroyed 3 enemy guns and machine gun, thus ensuring the success of Guselnikov's company. Katyusha gave several volleys. Artillerymen transferred the fire to the distant enemy trenches. Hardest of all got the 7th Company. 4 times its soldiers went up to storm the fortifications. For the motherland. Hurrah-ah-ah-ah-ah-ah-ah. Captain Kuksin shouted with all his might, and firing on the move with a machine gun, led the company behind him. However, soon Kuksin fell, pierced by a machine gun burst, and at the same moment another voice sounded over the fighting order of the company. Listen to my command. It was the platoon commander, Lieutenant Vsevolod Nikitovich Ishchuk. The 7th Company was immediately supported by the 8th. The fascists trembled, Unable to withstand the onslaught, the battalion broke into Kunersdorf. Evening was approaching. I thought about the losses. They were not insignificant. Cellophane cooks in. Sometimes we ate from the same kettle and smoked from the same pouch with him. We experienced joys and sorrows together. Sitting down, sometimes by the fire, for a long time we went over the past events in our memory, remembered our relatives, dreamed about the future, and now he is gone. Kunersdorf was taken at a high price. On April 20th, Soviet artillerymen gave the first salvos on Berlin. Before us lay the black smoking neighborhoods of the German capital. Before being drawn into street fighting, it was necessary to make up for the losses in men and military equipment. In each battalion remained 2 incomplete rifle companies. To Berlin. Before the storming of the German capital, our battalion was located in a beautiful grove, which in peacetime probably served as a place of rest for the inhabitants of Berlin. Now it resembled an anthill. Every scrap of ground was occupied. Groups of soldiers were stationed under the trees and near the bushes. Some were tidying up military equipment, others were fixing uniforms and shoes. At a linden tree damaged by shells, someone put a mirror on a stump and leisurely adjusted his moustache, and near the soldiers hung out washed uniforms. Here, the battalion paramedic Junior Lieutenant Boyko organized a medical aid station. Together with the orderlies, he bandaged the lightly wounded, handed out individual packets to the soldiers, and showed them how to apply bandages correctly. Gun technician of the regiment, Senior Lieutenant Ivan Petrovich Orlov, organized the repair of weapons. In short, the front life is going its way. The camp kitchen arrived, and the cook began to distribute food. As always, here you will hear a joke, a salty word, and bickering. Pour, don't spare. An elderly petty officer, always taut and cheerful, steps on the cook. Plough deeper, plough deeper. There are always tasty meat deposits at the bottom. Deeper, I say, insists another, winking slyly at the cook, and the one, as if tight on the ear, leisurely drives divorcing on the surface. Cunning. The regiment was reorganized. It became a 2-battalion regiment. In our 3rd battalion joined the remnants of the 1st, and at the same time assigned us and its serial number. In each company restored party and komsomol organizations. The battalion became a strong fighting unit. General Shatilov came. "Well, how are you resting?" he asked me friendly, shaking my hand. "We are preparing, Comrade General." "Are you satisfied with the replenishment?" Most of them are frontline soldiers, experienced men. Line up the battalion. I'll look at the people. They lined up quickly, and the general liked it. Approaching Guselnikov's company, he looked at the soldiers. Some of them have gauze bandages applied to fresh wounds. "Your men, Captain, fought hard for Kunersdorf. Well done. But even more persistently need to fight in Berlin because the complete defeat of the enemy is close." "We will do everything," assured Guselnikov General. "All agree with the company commander." Shatilov turned to the soldiers. "Yes, Comrade General," replied the company. "And maybe some of the wounded to send to the hospital?" Followed the question, which heard all the soldiers. The formation was silent. "There are such." Guselnikov interrogated. He answered several voices at once. "There are none." "No." Shatilov approached a tall soldier, whose left hand and head were tightly bound with a bandage soaked in blood. Shatilov put his hand on his shoulder, asked him sympathetically, "Shouldn't you get better?" "This is after the victory, Comrade General." "Thank you," said the commander. "It is necessary to finish the enemy. And soon." The general, as it seemed to me, had a good opinion of the battalion. Before leaving, he advised me to prepare assault groups, because in street battles we will have to act in small units. "Fighting will be brutal and severe," warned the division commander. "Take care of people, do not show excessive heat and haste. This often leads to wasted sacrifices." On the same memorable night, the night of April 21st in the Grove, was another event that had a great moral impact on the entire staff of the battalion. According to the decision of the Military Council, each division of the 3rd Shock Army was given a red banner to hoist one of them over the Reichstag as the victory banner. The decision of the Military Council was designed to unfold combat competition in the troops for even greater moral and political uplift. Which of the 9 banners will rise above the Reichstag? This question will be decided in the battles. Which division will be the first to reach the Reichstag? That division will hoist the victory banner over it. All 9 banners of the army were numbered. Scarlet Banner number 5 was handed to our division. With this news late in the evening arrived in the battalion deputy commander of the regiment on the political part of Lieutenant Colonel Yefimov. He briefly explained. The red banner, awarded to the division for hoisting over the Reichstag, will be transferred from the division to the advanced regiment, from the regiment to the advanced battalion. It is a supreme honor to have the banner transferred to your battalion. The Soviet army was inevitably covering the German capital. The troops of 2 fronts, 1st Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian fronts, bypassed the city from the north and south to join west of it, to encircle the entire Berlin grouping, dismember and destroy the enemy. On April 21st, the 3rd Shock Army under the command of Colonel General V. I. Kuznetsov stormed the northern outskirts of the German capital. More than 300,000 enemy troops, defending this large city, were caught in an iron vise, which increasingly clenched. The Nazis resisted with the fury of the doomed, but history had already passed its judgment on them. Above the city thick acrid smoke lingered. When airplane bombs and artillery shells hit, tall gloomy buildings collapsed like houses of cards. A cloud of yellow-brown dust was spreading in the air. Our division was rushing to the center of the German capital in the direction of the districts of Karo, Blankenberg, Reconnaissance, Plötzensee and further to the southeast in the Moabit district. The successful advance and the proximity of victory encouraged the soldiers. Their combat valor was boundless. The command post of the battalion was located in a dilapidated house. Window frames are broken, part of the ceiling collapsed, around broken bricks, rubble, bent ends of iron beams sticking out, furniture lying in disorder. I am looking through a hole in the wall, which was formed during the bombing. Next to me the regiment's intelligence officer Captain V.I. Kondrashov. At times we look at the map, rather shabby, scrawled with red and blue conventional signs. We are hampered by a corner house occupied by the enemy, worried Kondrashov. Fascists from there must be knocked out faster. Colonel Zinchenko demands not to delay the advance. We'll break through. I call Captain Guselikov. How are you? We need support. Not enough shells. I demand that people every step and act well thought out. That's right, but we can't just stand still. I understand. Hey, look ahead. Can you see the house? Yes. It's holding up the whole regiment. We must take the house. Do you hear, Captain? Understood, combat. Soldiers from Guselnikov's company went on the attack. The company bypassed the house from the rear and broke into the 1st and 2nd floors. The fight is for the stairwells, corridors and attic. The Germans beat back the 1st floor. Communication is interrupted. The company was cut off. Creates a dangerous situation. The Nazis on the 1st floor, ours on the 2nd. Staff Sergeant Gusev ordered a group of soldiers to guard the entrance from the 1st floor to the 2nd, and himself with soldiers Bogdanov, Prigonov and Rudnev through the window went down to the 1st. They pelted Hitlerites with grenades. 3 fascists killed, several wounded, the rest surrendered as prisoners. The prisoners had a miserable look, dirty, ragged, unshaven. Apparently, many days did not come out of hiding. Company Guselikov completely seized the house. Courageously fought in street battles Battery Lieutenant Sorokin. In the ruins through the breaches in the walls, artillerymen brought shells to the guns, manually rolled out guns for direct fire and accurate shots suppressed enemy firing points. The battalion was approaching a large square from which 5 streets diverged radially. On one of them the road was blocked by a booby-trapped barricade surrounded by barbed wire. I pointed at it from the window to the artilleryman Lieutenant Sorokin. See the barricade? Like in the palm of your hand. Let's fire at it. Blow it to smithereens. In a minute or two, shots rang out. The barricade was shrouded in smoke. Boards and stones flew into the air. Pankratov's company rushed to the attack and occupied the square. The battle for the next quarter began. Heroically fought our soldiers in the capture of Berlin, especially distinguished communicators. How many feats they accomplished, providing clear control of the units. We created command and observation posts in the most diverse places, in houses, basements, among the ruins, and every time it was necessary to quickly deploy means of communication. Is there a connection with Guselnikov, Pankratov, Samsonov? I often asked Sergeant Ermakov, commander of the telephone section. And almost always he answered, "The connection works, comrade captain." Bravely and selflessly acted also radio operators Nikolai Karpakov and Pavel Ferafontov. The further we moved towards the center of Berlin, the more we met enemy fortifications. Buildings, streets, alleys, everything that was of tactical importance, used by the enemy for defense. In the upper floors of houses were located snipers, machine gunners, observers, machine gunners. In the semi-basements and in the first floors were usually units armed with hand grenades and fausse patrons. At street intersections, the Nazis buried heavy tanks. Battles were fought not only on the ground but also in the subway, in subway sewers and drainage channels. In front of our regiment, the front edge of the enemy defence, passed along the south bank of the Furbindong canal, the harbour Westerfern, and along the railroad bed at the station Boyselstrasse. The canal was 45 metres wide and had concreted banks. The bridge over it was half destroyed and only 2 people could cross it at a time. Behind the bridge stretched an anti-tank ditch, in some places visible hollows, and all this was mined. On the night of April 26th, the 150th Infantry Division received a combat task to force Furbindong's canal and reach the Spree River in the northeastern part of Tiergarten Park. Our regiment was to seize the station Besselstrasse and advance in the southern direction Wiklevstrasse, Wilhelmshavener, Klein Tiergarten Park, to overcome the Spree River in the area of Moltke Bridge and further develop the offensive towards the Reichstag. During the advance at one of these points, the regiment was presented with the red banner. All soldiers and officers of our battalion remembered the rally in the grove near Berlin. And now the victory banner is not somewhere in the division headquarters, but in our regiment. But to which battalion it will be transferred is still unknown. We only knew if we have banner No. 5, it means that our 756th Rifle Regiment is advancing ahead of others. This encouraged the soldiers, called them to new feats. Colonel Zinchenko decided to build a combat order of the regiment in 2 echelons. Our battalion, which had the largest party in Komsomol layer, became the assault. We were supported by a division of the 328th Artillery Regiment, as well as part of the divisional and corps artillery groups. To force the Furbindong's canal, most of the artillery was set up for direct fire. Hand and machine guns were intended to fire at buildings from which the canal could be clearly viewed. The regimental commander directed the units from his observation post, located 200 metres from the first echelon fighting order. Communication was carried out by telephone, radio and through the officers of the headquarters. On the night of April 26th, sappers demined the bridge and on the enemy's bank blew up 6 piles. The sappers worked under crossfire of the enemy. Many died. Private Stankiewicz was wounded on the bridge. But the soldier did not leave the battlefield. Overcoming pain, he continued demining. A few minutes later, a bullet hit him in the chest, and Stankiewicz died a brave death. In the morning began a powerful artillery preparation. From the gunfire was a continuous rumble. Above our heads, tons of red-hot metal flew to the enemy positions, destroying pillboxes, houses and destroying the living force. But for a moment there was relative silence, and then the companies rushed forward. However, the first attempts to cross to the other bank did not bring us success. Hitlerites counterattacked. We had to lie down. Artillery came into action again. Artillery preparation continued for about 20 minutes. At that time, soldiers under the command of Captain Gorodov got over the canal and put a smoke screen. Under the cover of the curtain managed to capture the bridge, and by 23 hours the battalion, commanded by Captain Boev, seized the station Beuselstrasse and secured on the line Zickingenstrasse-Immenstrasse. More than 100 fascists were captured and 1,200 prisoners of war were released from the camp, among them Russians, Frenchmen, Englishmen, Dutchmen, Americans. Late in the evening, to the right of Wicklifstrasse crossed the canal and the 1st Battalion of the 469th Rifle Regiment. Companies occupied a bridgehead of half a kilometre along the front. The first artilleryman to cross the canal was Sergeant Novikov's calculation. The fascists suddenly opened heavy machine gun fire on him. All horses were killed, the rider was wounded, but the soldiers were not confused. They rolled the gun on their hands. Manually were ferried over a half-destroyed bridge, and the rest of the guns from the battery of Senior Lieutenant Fomenko. Having taken possession of the station Beuselstrasse, the 756th Rifle Regiment took the initial position for the attack on Moabit, the ancient, densely populated and heavily fortified district of Berlin. Along the way, battles for Klein-Tiergarten Park, Moabit Prison, and Old Moabit Street awaited us. From here the way opened to the north bank of the Spree River, which covered the approaches to the Tiergarten Park with the main government offices and the Reichstag. All day April 27th, the battalion persistently advanced along Besselstrasse, came to the intersection of this street from the side of Wicklifstrasse, then turned to the east, then turned sharply south to approach the Klein-Tiergarten Park via Turmstrasse. The escort artillery and even 152mm howitzers followed in the battle order of the assault units. By 8 p.m. On April 27th, our regiment cut Stromstrasse, Old Moabit Street, and captured the eastern part of Klein-Tiergarten Park. At this point, by decision of Colonel Zinchenko, we suspended the advance in order to put the units in order and pull up the rear. The ring around the fascist grouping was getting tighter and tighter. By April 21st, the Nazi troops defending Berlin occupied a territory of 325 square kilometers and had a total length of the front on the ring of about 100 kilometers, and after a week of fighting, their situation became catastrophic. The enemy defense was a narrow strip stretching from east to west for 16 kilometers. Its width was from 2 to 5 kilometers. On the morning of April 28th, 756th Regiment resumed the offensive. After 3 hours, our battalion came to the prison Moabit. It was located on a small hill and was surrounded by a high brick wall. A huge iron gate stood out. In the courtyard, up to a dozen massive buildings towered above the brick wall. How many people, known to the whole world, languished in the gloomy walls of this stone fortress? Here, for many years in solitary confinement, was held the leader of the German people, Ernst Thälmann, whom the Nazis did not allow to live until the bright day of victory over Hitlerism. Julius Fuchik, one of the best sons of the Czech people, was taken from here to be executed. The outstanding poet of the Tatar people, hero of the Soviet Union Musa Jalil, was imprisoned and died here. However, we did not have to storm the prison. The regiment commander made another decision. He ordered our battalion to advance in the direction of the Spree River and instructed the 2nd Battalion to eliminate the enemy garrison defending the prison. We again went along Old Moabit Street, and by 7 p.m. the companies reached the Spree. Berlin was on fire. The sky was coloured yellow-brown. Above the rumbling city, covered with ashes of fires, hung a thick cloud of black smoke and dust. For a moment the fascists were confused. They in no way expected that the Soviet soldiers would appear so quickly at the Spree. Next to me, near the horseshoe-shaped building, settled down Kuzma Gusvev with a radio operator. "Deploy the radio station. I will report to the regiment commander the situation," I ordered the Chief of Staff. Communication with Colonel Zinchenko established quickly. "We are on the embankment of the Spree." "No way." "Check if it is not some channel." "Check again and report again," demanded the colonel. After a more thorough examination of the coastal streets and the river, I had to report again that the battalion had reached the Spree. Soon we were joined by the battalions of Captain Davidov and Major Logvinenko. On the left were the fighting order of parts of the 171st Infantry Division. There was no doubt. Our troops approached from the north to the central part of the Park Tiergarten, the central sector of the defence of Berlin. This was the result of the 12-day offensive. So, parts of the 79th Infantry Corps came to the spree. The Corps commander received an order to force the river, to seize the Reichstag building and hoist the victory banner on it. Our battalion on its combat route more than once overcame water frontiers. But the crossing of the spree was extremely difficult for us. Its steep banks, dressed in polished granite, rose above the water level up to 3 meters. The winding channel formed an arc here, one end of which adjoined the Reichstag, and over the other was thrown a bridge called Moltke. The other bridges were destroyed by the Nazis. On the right, on the opposite bank, a widespread park Tiergarten, occupying dozens of hectares. Along it stretched Charlottenburger Straße, and to the south, beyond Tiergartenstraße, ran the Landwehr Canal. Park Tiergarten, Royal Square, all streets and squares adjacent to the Reichstag, the Nazis prepared for a long defence. Everywhere, wherever possible, they equipped trenches, passages and shelters. In the Park Tiergarten were placed anti-aircraft artillery and mortar batteries, which were continuously firing at our units. Anti-tank ditches, wire fences, minefields, all this made enemy defences difficult to overcome. In the building of the Ministry of the Interior, Himmler's house, was created multi-level system of rifle and machine gun fire. Artillerymen and Faustpatroniki were also planted there. The Nazi heavy gun division, located at Königsplatz, shelled the northern bank of the Spree and the far-stretching street Alt-Moabit. In the area of the Spree and the Reichstag, the Nazi command concentrated SS units. On the night of April 28th, they received reinforcements. A battalion of sailors, urgently delivered from Rostock, was dropped here by parachute. In the courtyard of the Imperial Chancellery, Hitler personally made a review of the troops intended for the defence of the Reichstag and ordered to fight to the last man. The Soviet troops were also preparing for the last battle. The Corps commander reinforced the rifle regiments with tanks and artillery. Battle order of the corps built in 2 echelons. In the first echelon on the right 150th, left 171st, and in the second echelon 207th Rifle Division. General Perevertkin moved his observation post closer to the Spree River. General Shatilov was at the observation post of our regiment in the building of the Ministry of Finance, and battalion commanders carried out the leadership of units directly in the fighting order of rifle companies. The battalion was to force the river, seize Himmler's house and further seize Königsplatz to take the initial position for the assault on the Reichstag. On April 28th, at 18 o'clock, the regimental commander gave me the order to start forcing the Spree. At that time I was in Guselnikov's company, and while waiting for this order I was puzzling over the question how to force the river, where to cross it. On the right decision depended the fate of the battalion, its men, who were to act in the main direction. 3 rifle companies, having reached the river, now lay in front of the reinforced concrete bridge Moltke. The way to it was blocked by mined barricades interwoven with barbed wire. There was only one way to the other side over the bridge. The battalion took the initial position to the right of the bridge, along the steep granite bank of the Spree. On the left were the companies of the battalion of K.I.A. Samsonov of the 171st Division. Nazi shells and mines were tearing around. The embankment was hidden by smoke. In the battalion came representatives of higher headquarters, political committees, correspondents of front and central newspapers. Came is not quite accurate. They reached us under heavy fire crawling, at great risk to their lives. Major Bondar, adjutant of the Corps commander, crawled to me in a large funnel from a high-explosive shell, followed by observers with radios. Comrade Nestrayev, he said in a hoarse, cold voice, General Perevertkin is setting up his observation post here. All units have been ordered to be in readiness to force the Spree. I don't think I had ever felt a greater responsibility than that which fell to my lot at that time in my whole life. All hopes were pinned only on the bridge, through which I hoped to break through with my companies to the other side. Suddenly there was a terrible rumble. The air was shaken by a deafening explosion. A column of fire flew high. Stones, pieces of metal, fragments of boards flew into the river. The Nazis had blown up the multi-EJR bridge. But when the smoke cleared, we found that the middle part of the bridge only sagged, warped and settled on the half-destroyed supports. Hitlerites obviously miscalculated. They had not put enough explosives, and they did not manage to destroy the bridge completely. My decision to cross remained the same. Who will go first? After some thought, I came to the firm decision that we should send Junior Sergeant Petya Piatnitsky. Together with him we had travelled a long way. I loved him for his bravery, impeccable performance, and Bogatair's grip in battle. Pyotr was my orderly. But when it was necessary to fulfill a particularly important task on the scale of a squad or platoon, I boldly entrusted it to him. And here, about 10 minutes ago, wounded the reserve platoon commander Sergeant Tit Porfirevich Anikin, a joker and funny man, a favourite of the whole battalion. And I decided to temporarily appoint Pyatnitsky platoon commander. Calling him to me, I said, "You will have to, Petya, with a platoon of reserve first to overcome the spree on the bridge. Behind you, platoon by platoon, will go the whole battalion." From excitement on the junior sergeant's cheekbone face the jaundices were setting. I understood that at this moment he is not afraid of neither death nor injury, but is concerned about only one thing: whether he can fulfill what he was assigned. Pyatnitsky replied, "The task is clear." The advance to the barricade of our forward platoon was supported by the fire of artillery batteries. Not only artillerymen and mortars opened fire machine guns, automatic rifles, carbines began to talk. The fascists responded in the same way. On the granite embankment bullets were ringing out thinly. In the air with hissing flew shells. Many of them burst in our fighting order, showering people with shrapnel. We suffered casualties. A solid wall of fire blocked the road to the platoon Pyatnitsky. Soldiers lay down at the barricade at the entrance to the bridge. Holding our breath, we watched their actions. Stopped in front of the barricade, the platoon was in a dangerous position. It was necessary to take decisive measures. I reported the situation to the regimental commander and introduced into the battle platoon Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Lebedev. Colonel Zinchenko informed me that he would immediately support the battalion with increased artillery fire. The artillerymen suppressed most of the enemy's firepower in Tiergarten Park, significantly destroyed the fortified German buildings on the Kronprinzenufer and Schlieffenufer embankments. The enemy began to shell our positions less. It was the decisive moment for forcing the spree. Platoons of Junior Sergeant Pyatnitsky and Nikolai Lebedev rushed forward. Following the bursts of our artillery shells, soldiers in full height rushed to the bridge. For support, for the development of success, rushed forward Fighters Company Senior Lieutenant Pankratov. Meanwhile, Pyatnitsky moved to the other side of the river. Behind him, Lebedev. Having overcome the last barricade, the soldiers broke into the corner building and engaged in hand-to-hand combat in the corridors and numerous rooms. The 2nd Rifle Company of Lieutenant Mikhail Fedorovich Grankin crossed to the other side. Behind it, machine gunners, mortars, and the rest of the units of my battalion. Units of the 1st Battalion of the 380th Rifle Regiment of the 171st Rifle Division of Senior Lieutenant Konstantin Yakovlevich Samsonov also participated in the storming of this bridge, and the bridge was taken. The way across the river was opened. The spree with its granite banks was left behind. All night on April 29th, there was a fierce struggle for the expansion of the bridgehead. German artillery continuously shelled the bridge multi-ER, restored by our sappers. On it went tanks, artillery, ammunition was thrown up. Enemy shells, hitting the cast-iron beams, now and then burst over the water. Companies of Senior Lieutenant Pankratov and Lieutenant Grankin broke into the building of the Swiss embassy, from the windows and loopholes of which the fascists were machine gun and machine gun fire. The building was so damaged that it seemed about to collapse. Clearing the way with grenades, the infantrymen engaged in hand-to-hand combat in the gloomy corridors and rooms of the embassy. It was difficult to orient themselves in the dark labyrinths of the unfamiliar house. Around every corner, Around every bend, the advancing soldiers were spotted by German machine gunners, but by morning the battalion had completely taken possession of the entire Swiss embassy. My trench coat was not up to my height. Long and wide it dangled and got in the way when running over. I should have changed it for a more comfortable one, but I did not do it in time and was punished. However, maybe it was it, the overly spacious cloak tent, that saved my life. At dawn, the battalion headquarters was moving to a new CP. We had to cross an open area. Petya Pyatnitsky, who again became my orderly, ran across successfully. From behind a pile of broken bricks, he waved at me, "Come on." I rushed towards him and suddenly fell down. It seemed to me that from behind someone pulled me by the floorboards. I hit my chest hard against the asphalt and could not breathe. I struggled to get up and, straining my strength, tore the cloak. It slipped off my shoulders. Only now I discovered that I had caught the tent coat on a bar sticking out of the brick wall over which I had jumped. I can't remember how I found myself behind the pile of bricks next to Petya. Somehow it seemed that I, helpless and weak, was lost in the rumble and fire of this huge alien city. Maybe I lost consciousness for a moment. I opened my mouth wide, breathing deeply and often. Petya put his hand on my forehead. "What's wrong with you, Comrade Combat? Wounded?" I looked at him, and his eyes seemed white to me. I thought it's interesting Petya has white eyes, and I didn't know that he had such eyes. I hadn't noticed them before. Petya was fingering my body with his hand. "No, Petya, I'm not wounded." The resident's eyes became bright. A miracle. It's the first time I've seen a man's eyes change. From surprise I even lifted up, sat down next to him, hugged him by the shoulders. "It turned out great, Comrade Combat. You are lucky," he spoke animatedly. "How only you managed to fall. I see in front of you so, and smoked across the road a machine gun line. Sparks sprinkled. You lay down, and he, the bastard, kept firing from the machine gun. And when you made a rush to me, the kraut scratched again. And right on the trench coat. That's when he started talking about the Cape tent. Why did you throw the cloak? I took it from the platoon commander by force. I won't give it to him, he said. You're taking the 5th tent for the commander in a week. But I did take it, Petya finished proudly. I smiled, but did not confess that I had fallen not of my own free will. Petya didn't understand my smile. He took it as approval of his story. Behind the ruins, someone asked loudly, "Where's the captain?" I searched all the ruins. From behind the collapsed wall appeared Pankratov's liaison. He was ragged and sullen. "Pankratov is dying," said the contact. "He asked me to look for you. He wanted to say goodbye." Pankratov was lying in a semi-basement. It was damp there. It was hard to breathe. In many places there were gaping holes. They found a place for a wounded company commander. I pounced on the contact. "Bring him upstairs." Pankratov was carried out into the courtyard. He was unconscious. Immediately he was sent to the rear. The battalion's base station was behind a pile of bricks. Companies were preparing for a new attack. In front of us stood Himmler's house. To me ran up Senior Lieutenant Samsonov, former commander of our machine gun company, and now deputy commander too. He said that on the orders of Colonel Zinchenko will take the defence in the house of the Swiss embassy and will fire from the spot to support our battalion in the offensive on the Himmler's house. At 7 a.m. The divisional artillery group made a fire raid on Himmler's chancellery, the Kroll Opera House, and other buildings. Most effective was the fire of rocket launchers. When the rays of the rising sun illuminated the central quarters, we discerned directly in front of us, on the opposite side of the street, a large 6-story building, the Ministry of the Interior. Here was the centre of the brown web of German fascism. From here, from this black house, secret packages, encryptions and orders to the Gestapovs to shoot, hang, burn and kill millions of people were sent to many countries of Europe. The house was defended by a battalion of SS men. From attics, from windows and basements beat large-caliber machine guns. The Nazis fired from Faust patrons, intensifying the fires along the Spree embankment. It became clear to us that Himmler's house would not be easy to take, but it was necessary to take it at any cost, as it covered the exit to the Royal Square, on which stood the Reichstag. The regimental commander came to us. As always, in the first place, Colonel Zinchenko asked about the main thing about the combat effectiveness of the battalion. "Are there many dead and wounded?" 40 men, Comrade Colonel, I reported. Wounded 2 company commanders, Captain Duselnikov and Senior Lieutenant Pankratov. Heavily wounded evacuated, and lightly wounded refused to go to the rear, remained in the ranks. Instead of Duselnikov, appointed Lieutenant Vsevolod Nikitovich Ishchuk, who under Kunersdorf replaced Captain Kuksin and temporarily commanded the company. Capable, brave. I think he'll manage. For Pankratov, Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Alexeyevich Antonov. The colonel agreed with the appointment of Ishchuk and Antonov as company commanders. He listened to my report, took out of his pocket kit set, filled a pipe. "Be strong, Stepan. It won't be long now." Captain Davidov's battalion was the first to storm Himmler's house. The fascists opened heavy rifle and machine gun fire on it. From the windows and holes of the 6-story house whipped lead lines. Intense shooting was conducted from our side. Everything around was covered with smoke and grey-brown dust. The soldiers crossed the street in groups and took cover around the corner of a building. Lieutenant Koshkarbayev, a young and hot Bashkir with a swarthy, weathered face and hair as black as pitch, led his platoon in the attack. Koshkarbayev's men stormed the corridor. By 1 p.m. on April 29th, Captain Davidov's rifle companies had captured several rooms of the first floor. At the same time, our battalion took possession of the corner of the building on the Schlieffenhofer side. Lieutenant Grankin's company sneaked into the second floor, where a heavy hand-to-hand fight ensued. Grankin was wounded in the left arm, but continued to command. The lieutenant was wounded a second time, this time in the head, and he fell. Senior Sergeant Gukov, a squad commander, took command of the company. But soon he was killed. The company suffered heavy losses, and I had to disband it, as they say, on the move. At its expense replenished the company Antonov and Ishchuk. In the evening, to build on the success, we sent to us a battalion of Major Logvinenko. He began to advance on the southwestern part of the house. The brutal, exhausting battle for the building of the Ministry of Internal Affairs continued with increasing force. We suffered heavy losses, but steadily moved forward, capturing rooms, corridors, stairwells. Fires broke out in the building furniture, cabinets with papers, carpets were burning. Acrid smoke was spreading, which made eyes water. Only in the deep night the noise and rumbling on the first floors began to subside and move to the upper floors. The tension of the battle gradually weakened, the resistance of the enemy was broken. Our units took possession of Himmler's house. Before morning, the battalion concentrated in 3 large rooms, similar to casemates. Through a semi-basement window I look into the distance. The night sky is covered with smoke, below everything covered with the glow of the fire, and darkness is spreading on the ground itself. There are no buildings ahead. On the radio I hear Zinchenko's voice, "Where are you? Where are you?" Over. 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 I report, not quite sure. I am at the end of the house. I myself think maybe it's not the end of the house. Maybe the building still goes somewhere deep inside the colonel orders. Attack the Reichstag. Come out quickly to the Reichstag. I hang up the phone. Zinchenko's voice still sounds in my ears. Attack the Reichstag. Come out faster to the Reichstag. And where is it, the Reichstag? Hell knows where it is. It's dark and deserted ahead. I'm raising the battalion. I'm marching into the darkness, under the glow. On the right, very close, a machine gun rumbled. I don't know where it's firing. Someone groaned in the chain. The battalion lay down. I went back to the building, to my post. Not 5 minutes later, the regiment received a new request. Did you come out, or what, to the Reichstag? When will you come out? After all, Neustroyev, the Reichstag is close to you, quite close. We're leaning over the map with Gusey thinking. Himmler's house. We're on this corner. We should attack strictly to the southeast. Everything seems right, but why fire on the right? Finally, we got our bearings. I'm calling the regiment commander on the radio. Give fire to the right. Our mortars started talking, followed by the cannons. Flashes of bursts illuminated the terrain, but at a short distance. After the bursts, visibility became even worse. All around is black, as in the abyss. With anxiety, I thought about the fact that there is no elbow communication between the companies. In the darkness, it is easy to lose the right direction. In addition, the men were very tired. To attack in such an environment was very risky. I told the Chief of Staff, establish a telephone link with the companies. Wake me up in an hour. Immediately fell on the floor. I had not slept for 3 days. Woke me Gusev as agreed, exactly 1 hour later. I sat on the floor. Looking at the Chief of Staff, he said something. But the meaning of the words I did not understand was still in the power of sleep. How is the connection with the companies? Are the losses heavy? These were my first questions. The losses are small. There is no sense to establish telephone communication with the companies. The companies are 50 meters away from us. Look for yourself, they're right outside the window. The light was shining through the cellar windows. Morning. Morning of April 30th, 1945. In front of my eyes was a huge field torn up, ploughed by shells. Somewhere there were mutilated trees. To better understand the situation, I had to go up to the second floor. The depth of the square, if you could call it a field, was 300 meters. The square was cut into 2 parts by a canal filled with water. Behind the canal, German defences, trenches, bunkers, anti-aircraft guns put on direct fire. Near the guns, swarming people. At the end of the square is a 3-story grey building with a dome and towers. At first sight unremarkable, it did not interest me. Behind it, about 200 meters away, I could see a huge multi-story building. It was burning and thick black smoke was billowing from it. Probably this is the Reichstag. But how to reach it? Ahead of the moat, trenches, guns and grey building. I went down to the basement and reported the situation to the regimental commander by radio. He listened calmly and briefly ordered, attack in the direction of the big house. I set a task for the companies to advance to the left of the grey building, bypass it, go to the burning house and entrench. The battalion prepared for the attack. The guns of Captain Vinokurov, Senior Lieutenant Chelamit Tikagapso, and the gun crew of Major Teslenko's division were placed in the breaches of Himmler's house at direct aiming. The batteries of Lieutenant Sorokin and Captain Wolfson took up firing positions in the fighting order of the rifle companies. Near the guns I met Senior Lieutenant Yuri Fedorovich Stepanov, with whom I had travelled all the way from Staraya Russa. He was wounded. We had to send him immediately to the medical centre. Finally, our artillery opened fire. The square behind the canal and the grey building was covered with smoke and dust. A series of red rockets, the signal of attack. Companies with a shout of hurrah rushed forward, but we had no time to run even 10 meters, as the enemy rained hundreds of heavy mines and shells on us. Our hurrah was drowned in the rumble. The attack faltered. Soon Colonel Zinchenko came to me at the NP. I reported to him that I could not get to the Reichstag in any way. The grey building from which we were firing and the very heavy fire from the right were in the way. Fyodor Matveyevich went to the window. The window was not so high from the floor, but Zinchenko rose on tiptoe. Someone had put a box under his feet. He held the map in his hands for a long time, looked at the window and again at the map. Zinchenko's eyes suddenly lit up with a smile. He was excited. "Nestroyev, come here. Look." I stood on the box next to the regiment commander, but I did not understand what Zinchenko was happy about. "Look carefully, Stepan. The Reichstag is in front of us." "Where?" I involuntarily asked. "Yes, in front of you. The grey building that's in your way is the Reichstag." "The grey building is the Reichstag." I stretched out uncertainly. Exactly, Comrade Combat. The grey building is the Reichstag. Fyodor Matveevich finished and jumped off the crate onto the floor. Gusev and I looked at each other in embarrassment. Colonel Zinchenko left for the regiment's CP to report the situation to the division commander, General Shatilov. In parting said, "Prepare the battalion to storm the Reichstag." After he left, I leaned again against the window. The grey building absorbed all my attention. It was no longer just a building, but something very significant, the final goal of our battles and campaigns, our suffering and anguish. In appearance, the Reichstag is unassuming. 3 floors, 4 towers, in the centre of the dome, and on the dome a spire. The windows and doors are bricked up with red brick. You can see it very clearly. In place of the windows and doors are embrasures. I put binoculars to my eyes. There were machine gun barrels in the embrasures. I counted up to 20 of them. So much for the Reichstag, I reasoned to myself, a real fortress. The enemy from the Reichstag, and on the right, from the Kroll Opera House, whipped lead. Soon the Nazis opened fire from artillery and heavy mortars, but their shells with howling flew over us and burst somewhere behind, in the area of Moltke Bridge, through which the command urgently transferred to us tanks, artillery and guards mortars Katyusha. In the air showed our planes. They went wide front. At the Brandenburg Gate in the Park Tiergarten shuddered earth the enemy fire on the bridge. Moltke stopped. In a few minutes at Himmler's house appeared dozens of our T-34s, behind them tractors pulled heavy guns. Following were Katyusha, and all this mass of military equipment was installed on a narrow section of the front. It was cramped, and there was not enough space. Sergeant Viktor Kuprianov from Vinokurov's battery managed to drag his gun to the 2nd floor. His idea was taken up by many people. Even 2 Katyushas were dragged up the wide staircases of Himmler's house to the 2nd floor. The doorways turned out to be narrow. They were quickly widened, the inner walls were dismantled, and the formidable weapons were aimed at the Reichstag. From the regimental headquarters came Senior Sergeant Sianov. 2 days ago he was wounded, but the wound was light, and he was in the Sanbat of the division. I was glad to see Sianov come. Few veterans of the battalion had survived, and here's an old acquaintance. Hello, Elia Yakovlevich. Tell me, how did you come back to the battalion? He told me that this morning all the rear units of the division heard a rumour that Nistrov's battalion had almost taken the Reichstag. That's why Sianov was in a hurry. The doctors wouldn't let him go. So he simply ran away. He called the Assistant Chief of Staff of the regiment, Major Andrei Logvinov, and said that it is necessary to immediately send to the headquarters of some of the officers to get replenishment. Captain Yaranov and Deputy Lieutenant Berest were in companies and lay in the chain of gunners in the Royal Square. It was impossible to withdraw them. The Germans held the square under a multi-level machine gun fire. At the NP with me was Senior Lieutenant Gusev, but I needed him. I decided to send Sianov. He, although a senior sergeant, but could in a combat situation to replace the officer. An hour later, Sianov brought about 100 people. At this time, the battalion had 350 men. The replenishment seemed solid, especially since half of them consisted of frontline soldiers who had returned from the hospital after being wounded. The rest were mostly young men of about 18. With Sianov in the battalion came Captain Matveev, agitator of the political department of the division, and Captain Prilov, agitator of the regiment. From the replenishment formed the 1st Company. Its commander I appointed Sianov. Platoons and squads were led by experienced soldiers. They were selected simply by appearance. You look elderly, a frontline soldier, not bad alignment, you say you will command the 1st platoon. And you the 2nd, and you the 3rd. Matveev and Prilov came at the right time. In the new company they explained to the soldiers the task, told about the battalion's combat path. The young men listened with open mouths. The agitators spoke very engagingly and intelligently. The Reichstag at that time attracted everyone's attention. In addition to the banner of the political department of the army, we also had red flags, which on the initiative of party leaders and Komsorg of companies made by the soldiers themselves. There were a lot of flags, 1 or even 2 for each squad. Everyone wanted to break into the Reichstag faster. Let me go ahead. I gave my word before the formation that I would get to Hitler's lair first, asked the machine gunner Private Yakimovich, who with a small group of soldiers was in my reserve. There was nothing ostentatious in the request of a former warrior. The same insisted Sergeant Ischanov, Soldier Priganov, Bull, Shuskin, Bogdanov, Solodovnikov. My fighting spirit of people inspired confidence that the attack will be completed successfully. The soldiers lived with one thought: to take the Reichstag. With me there was a group of communists with a banner from the Corps headquarters headed by Captain Makov. With him were Senior Sergeants Lysimenko, Minin, Zagitov. This group was tasked personally by the Corps Commander General Perevertkin to hoist the Corps flag over the Reichstag. The same group, led by Major Bondar, went to the battle order of the neighbouring 171st Infantry Division. All the cellars of the corner part of the Himmler's house were occupied by unfamiliar to me officers' artillerymen, tankers. They installed stereo tubes, established communication by telephone and walkie-talkies. The cellars were like an anthill. There was no one there. Correspondents, cameramen, some representatives from Moscow. My headquarters and command post with a telephone set and a walkie-talkie were pressed into a corner. To the smallest detail we practiced with the tankers of the 23rd Tank Brigade and artillerymen all the issues of interaction. This is the main organizational issue, on which depends on the outcome of the battle. Especially skillfully and heroically acted tankers from the battalion of Major I. L. Yartsev. They destroyed 12 enemy tanks and self-propelled vehicles by direct fire of T-34 tanks, which blocked the way to the Reichstag to our battalion. In the ranks of this glorious tank battalion fought my schoolmate and childhood friend Nikolai Stepanovich Mosin, who was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for storming the Reichstag. After the war N.S. Mosin returned to our hometown Berezovsky, where I met him in 1946. It was evening. Zinchenko on the phone ordered. In 15 minutes, the attack. I'm waiting for a report from the Reichstag. Tasks companies set? Asked me agitator political department of the division Matveev. Set. Gursev added. By the way, the task to take the Reichstag was set back in 1941, at the beginning of the war. Matveev replied without a smile. That's a great point. Even before the regiment commander's call, I called Captain Yaronov and Staff Sergeant Sanov. Can you see that grey building over there well? They answered in the affirmative. At the signal, you'll lead the company into the attack. The 2nd and 3rd companies act on the left. Together with them, you will break into the Reichstag. They listened silently and attentively. I see. Comrade Combat. Have a good journey. I hope to meet you in the Reichstag. Here, next to it, stood Captain Prilov. Friendly touching Senior Sergeant Sanov by the shoulder, he said. You, Sanov, have a great honor. I'll try to justify my trust. After all, I am a communist. For several minutes Sanov did not leave the window. He was marking and memorizing landmarks. On the left a transformer box, on the right a small house, in the center a poster board. I once again and again analyzed the battalion's combat capability. Companies and platoons were commanded by combat commanders who had experience of fighting in a large city. The 2nd company was commanded by Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Alexeyevich Antonov. Before that he had been a platoon commander with Captain Guselikov, who had a lot to learn from. In his abilities I had no doubt. The 3rd company was commanded by Lieutenant Vsevolod Nikitovich Ishchuk, who at Kunersdorf replaced the killed Captain Kuksin. True, the 1st company was just formed and caused me doubts, but I decided to help Sanov to send his deputy in the formation of Captain Vasily Ivanovich Yaronov. Machine Gun Company was headed by Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Dmitrievich Zarkov, a brave and impeccable commander. One platoon of his company was commanded by a joker and funny Lieutenant Gerasimov. The Mortar Company was commanded by Senior Lieutenant Arseny Ivanovich Shabakov. I knew him from that 1st Battalion at Schneidermall, when the battalion was commanded by Captain Kastukin, and I was the commander of the 3rd Battalion. Shachabakov was always at the observation post of that rifle company, which was particularly difficult. The PTR platoon was commanded by the fearless Lieutenant Nikita Nikiforovich Kozlov, a favorite of the entire battalion. Lieutenant Boris Ivanovich Osipov skillfully deployed his sanitary platoon, and I believe that he would give the wounded all his strength and skill. The Partog of the battalion, Lieutenant N.N. Petrov, and the battalion commissar, Lieutenant Zhuravlev, showed themselves well in the Minsk-Mazovets operation. In short, the commanders of all degrees in the battalion were reliable. Companies managed to bring to the full staff. Colonel Zinchenko, by 18.00, replenished the battalion at the expense of the rear units of the regiment. Issues of interaction with tankers and artillerymen worked out. I personally, as a battalion commander, did not doubt the success of the assault. Fire. 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 Fire on the Reichstag. I heard artillery officers' commands from all sides. One major shouted fire into the tube in such a way that large blue veins swelled on his neck. His voice was strong, commanding. Major as if passing judgment on the fascist lair. Soon the commands were drowned in the rumble. It was only visible as the commanders opened and closed their mouths. The raid was short but stunning, and here Company Sianova rushed to the Reichstag. She jumped over the canal, but there she had to immediately lie down. Before the attack, as I have already mentioned, on the initiative of communists and Komsomol members in the battalion prepared red flags of different sizes and shapes. Each squad had one or even two of them. And now dozens of red flags unfolded along the entire chain of the attacking battalion. Each soldier wanted it was his soldier's flag to be the first to appear in the Nazi Reichstag. It was mass heroism, and there was no force that could stop the Soviet soldiers on their way to victory. Petya Pyatnitsky on the run unfurled the scarlet cloth, and it ran unstoppably to the Reichstag. Around Pyatnitsky quickly grouped fighters. Here they are already 10, 20. At the same time, my deputy in the political department, Lieutenant Berest, rose to his full Bogotusky height, and together with Antonov they dragged behind them the second company, which since morning lay on the square, pressed to the ground dense fire. The company rushed swiftly toward the Reichstag. Captain Yaronov, my deputy in formation, raised the first company in the attack. Lieutenant Ishchuk jumped out of the funnel, turned to the attacking chain of his third company, and with a shout for the motherland, forward, rushed toward the front entrance. 12 machine guns of Senior Lieutenant Zarkov's company flanked the rifle company with fire. Zarkov himself lay behind the machine gun and fired at the houses of the Foreign Embassy quarter, from where the Nazis were firing machine gun fire at the attacking chain of the battalion. But soon the company commander was severely wounded. The company was led by Lieutenant Gerasimov. In the chain of storming was and a group of Capt. N. Makova. It stayed in our battalion for 2 days. Vladimir Nikolaevich Makov, a tall, slender officer I liked at once. And now, when he led his group in the attack, his remarkable moral and combat qualities, bravery and determination, courage and selflessness, the beauty of a Russian bogatyr, were manifested. In this attack ahead went communists and Komsomol members. Many of them fell on the square, but the living unstoppably rushed forward. Chains were thinning. Petya Pyatnitsky was the first to break through to the Reichstag. In front of him, the granite staircase of the front entrance. Gasping from tension, Pyatnitsky immediately jumped up on the third step and immediately, hit by a machine gun burst, fell down. In his hand remained an unthrown grenade. How many times in the battle's death had passed Petya by? And here, at the front entrance to the Reichstag, on the threshold of victory, Peter Nikolaevich Pyatnitsky died. Scarlet blood stained the stone slabs of the stairs. The red flag was picked up by Sergeant Sherbina. It was the last attack of the battalion in the harsh 4-year war. The last one. The last attack. The enemy on the left almost did not fire. On the right, from the park, we could hear cheers, and from the windows of the Reichstag the Nazis poured lead on the attackers, but whoever managed to reach its walls was already out of the zone of enemy fire. At the front entrance of the Reichstag a series of green rockets soared. This was Yaronov's signal that the battalion had broken into the Reichstag. As soon as Yaronov gave the green rocket, I ordered Gusev, the the battalion's chief of staff, to immediately organize a new battalion observation post just inside the Reichstag. Gusev and the commander of the communications platoon, Petty Officer Kasyan Sergeyevich Sandul, ducking to the ground, ran to the Reichstag. At that time it was already evening, and I soon lost sight of them. Behind Gusev and Sandul, the commander of the linear communications department, Sergeant Ermakov, and his signalman pulled the telephone connection from Himmler's house to the Reichstag. I waited anxiously. On the right to the Reichstag ran the soldiers of battalions of our division of Captain Vasily Davidov and Major Yakov Logvinenko, on the left the battalion of Senior Lieutenant K. Samsonov from the 171st Rifle Division, but they have not yet been able to reach the Reichstag. They were counterattacked by the Nazis and repulsed the attack until 24 hours. Only in the second hour of the night of May 1st, when the victory banner was already hoisted, Samsonov entered the Reichstag with 2 companies. But it must be said that battalions Davidov and Logvinenko April 30th fought hard until late at night on the right, not reaching the Reichstag 100–150 meters. They thus provided our battalion with the opportunity to break into the building and fight in it without fear that the Nazis would bypass us on the right and attack us in the flank and rear. And Samsonov's battalion secured our left flank. If Samsonov's men had not shown courage and fortitude in repulsing the fierce counterattacks of the enemy, our battalion would hardly have managed to break into the Reichstag. And if we had, the Nazis would have bypassed us on the left and attacked the Reichstag from the rear. Let the reader forgive me for the fact that I write mainly about soldiers, sergeants and officers of my battalion, and only rarely mention the men of neighbouring regiments and battalions. I think they will write about their glorious deeds themselves. At the same time, when the neighbouring battalions were fighting on the flanks, on the first floor of the Reichstag our assaulting companies met fierce enemy resistance. The Nazis poured machine gun fire not only on the attackers, but also on those numerous rooms and long corridors into which our soldiers had not yet entered. It was the fire of doomed, faint-hearted people, from which, however, we did not suffer much loss. The blow of our units was powerful and organized, and the enemy, unable to withstand such a rapid onslaught, began to retreat. We occupied one after another rooms, corridors and halls. At last I heard the long-awaited ringing of the telephone. Although less than an hour had passed, it seemed like an eternity. Captain Yaronov called from the Reichstag. He briefly reported the new battalion observation post is ready. Companies and individual assault groups are fighting in the depths of the Reichstag, but the battle is subsiding. Only individual machine gun bursts, and sometimes grenade bursts can be heard. Battalion in the Reichstag. Moving. I reported to the regiment commander. The battalion control group, which included the commanders of supporting artillery divisions and individual batteries, with their observers, radio operators and communicators, numbered more than 30 people. The group included my old friends, with whom I fought at Stara Russa, the commander of 76mm artillery battery Senior Lieutenant Ivan Petrovich Kucherin. In 43rd he was a senior sergeant, and Lieutenant Nikolai Fomich Minakov, commander of a battery of 120mm regimental mortars. The fascists from closed positions were firing artillery and mortar fire on the square. The soldiers ran from funnel to funnel. Shells and mines were often bursting around. We reached the Reichstag. In the lobby I was met by Captain Yaronov. He reported thoroughly about everything. After listening to the report I looked around. It's dark around. No shooting. Silence. It was unsettling. We realized it was only a temporary lull. Antonov's second company took up defences in the lobby and central hall. Lieutenant Ishchok positioned himself on the right flank. On the left flank with Company Sianov Captain Yaronov. I came to the conclusion that to move further into the depths of the building is now risky. In the darkness in the many rooms can atomize the battalion. What if the Germans counterattack? We are in the Reichstag itself. I decided to keep the companies compact, and I was not mistaken. As it soon turned out, in the underground rooms of the Reichstag was preparing to counterattack a significant garrison of the Nazis. The central hall served us as a key position. The hall adjoined the lobby. They were separated by high double oak doors. The lobby led to the front entrance. The Germans could not bypass the lobby. Several corridors converged into the hall. It was necessary to take control of the corridors, and to do this to take a circular defence. Captain Markov and his group remained in the battalion until the end of the battle. They shared with us all the difficulties of the battle and the joy of victory. Captain Markov had already reported to the corps commander, General Perevertkin, that his group had carried out the order the banner of the 79th Corps Pez was hoisted on the roof of the Reichstag. After the report, Markov, with his men Vasily Familsky, Gazi Zagitov, Sasha Lysimenko and Senior Sergeant Mikhail Manin, went to the combat order of Lieutenant Kozlov's platoon on my order. At the same time, I reported in detail to the regiment commander the whole situation and expressed my plans. In response, I heard, "I approve the decision. If possible, give the personnel of the battalion a rest. The wounded immediately sent to the rear." The battalion headquarters was placed in a small, windowless, deaf room. At that time, the left flank company from Captain Davidov's battalion entered the lobby. It was commanded by Officer Grechenkov. Soon after, the company of Senior Lieutenant Peter Grechenkov, also from the battalion of Davidov, entered the Reichstag and another unit. With noise and shouting, a group of 30 men burst into the lobby. She illuminated the hall with a dozen flashlights. I asked, "Who are these people? Where from?" A short, broad-shouldered man came out to meet me, and I immediately recognized him, Lieutenant Koshkarbayev. He was famous in the division as a fearless officer. "That's what I said, Lieutenant. Take the defense on the left flank of our battalion. We'll defend the Reichstag together. The enemy is about to counterattack." The lieutenant called out. At 10 o'clock in the evening, Colonel Zinchenko came to the Reichstag. He was accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel Efimov, Major Sokolovsky, and Captain Kondratov. I rejoiced at their arrival. "Captain Nestroyev, report the situation." I thoroughly outlined the essence of the case, but the colonel was interested in the banner. I tried to explain to him that there are many banners. Flag Pyatnitsky set Peter Shabina on the column of the front entrance. The flag of the 2nd Company Yaronov ordered to display in the window overlooking the Royal Square. The flag of the 3rd Company. In short, I explained that the company, platoon and squad flags are set in the location of their positions. "Not that you say, Comrade Combat," sharply interrupted me Zinchenko. I ask, "Where is the banner of the Military Council of the Army No. 5? Banner of the Military Council of the Army was at the command post of the regiment, in the Himmler's house. Zinchenko called to the phone chief of staff of the regiment, Major Kazakov, and ordered him, "Bring the banner immediately to the Reichstag." In 10 to 15 minutes, Major Kazakov called the Reichstag and reported to the regiment commander that he had sent the banner. It was carried by the regiment scouts Mikhail Igorov and Militon Kantaria. We waited. On the square there was a lot of machine gun and machine gun rattle. "They are carrying." Relieved, exhaled the colonel. Soon 2 of our scouts, Sergeant Igorov and Junior Sergeant Kantaria, ran into the lobby. They unfurled a scarlet cloth, the banner of the Military Council of the 3rd Shock Army No. 5. It was destined to become the banner of victory. Colonel Zinchenko was silent for a minute. Then he spoke quietly but solemnly. "The Supreme High Command of the Armed Forces of the Soviet Union, on behalf of the Communist Party, our socialist motherland, and the entire Soviet people, ordered us to hoist the victory banner over Berlin. This historic moment had arrived." I looked at the banner with excitement. So that's what it is. Now it will be carried upstairs, and it will be draped in the wind over the defeated Berlin. Then I turned my gaze to the scout soldiers. They were also excited. After all, it was to them, simple Soviet guys, soldiers of the valiant victorious army, the army of the country of Soviets, fell the high honor to hoist the victory banner. Who are they, these guys? Mikhail Igorov was born and grew up in Smolensk, China. In 1941, when the war broke into his native village, he went to the partisan detachment as a 17-year-old boy. In summer and winter, together with his comrades, People's Avengers, he bravely fought the invaders. When the Soviet army liberated the Smolensk region, Michael became a soldier of one of the units. Militon Kantaria's biography is not complicated. He was born and grew up in sunny Abkhazia, at the front from the first days of the Great Patriotic War. He participated in the liberation of Soviet Latvia and Belarus. As a member of a reconnaissance platoon, came to Berlin. Colonel Zinchenko turned to me again. Comrade Combat, ensure the hoisting of the victory banner over the Reichstag. I ordered Lieutenant Berest. You will go together with the scouts. It is necessary to choose a place higher and there to hoist the banner. I said these words, and I was overcome with pride for my motherland. Berest, Igorov and Kantaria headed for the stairs leading to the upper floors. They were cleared the way by the machine gunners of Sinov's company, and almost immediately they heard shooting and the rattle of grenades bursting from somewhere above. Half an hour passed. Berest and the scouts still did not return. We waited impatiently for them downstairs in the lobby. The shooting upstairs had subsided, but from the Brandenburg Gate and from Tiergarten Park the Nazis were firing machine guns and automatic weapons at the roof of the Reichstag. The minutes stretched slowly. But here at last. On the stairs heard footsteps, steady, calm and heavy. Only Berest could walk like that. Alexei Prokopievich reported. The victory banner was placed on the bronze equestrian sculpture on the pediment of the main entrance. They tied it with straps. It won't come off. It will stand for hundreds of years. Colonel Zinchenko, his deputy in the political part, Lieutenant Colonel Efimov and the head of intelligence of the regiment, Captain Kondratov, went to the regiment's CP in Himmler's house. In the Reichstag for the senior commander remained me. After 2:00 in the morning on May 1st, the shooting subsided. Sometimes our old German shells would fly overhead and burst somewhere far away. Only rockets and flames of fire are visible over Berlin, through the front entrance of the Reichstag, through which our battalion broke into the citadel of fascism on the evening of April 30th, more and more units began to enter. They were infantrymen, artillerymen, tankers, communicators from almost all units of the 79th Rifle Corps, and everyone wanted to hoist their flag over the Reichstag. The flags of Lieutenant R. Koshkarbayev and Private G. Bulatov from the 674th Rifle Regiment, Junior Sergeant E. Eremin and Private G. Savinko from the 1st Battalion of the 380th Regiment, Sergeant P. Smirnov and Privates N. Velenkov and L. Somov from the 525th Regiment, Sergeant B. Yaparov from the 86th Heavy Howitzer Artillery Brigade were flying here. Meanwhile, new units continued to enter the Reichstag. A dangerous overcrowding of people was created. I thought that for the defense of the Reichstag and to repel Nazi counterattacks it was necessary to leave here one regiment or a combat-ready reinforced battalion. I reported my thoughts to Colonel Zinchenko by telephone. Not an hour later, as all units except our battalion were withdrawn from the Reichstag. The morning came. The hall turned out to be huge, half filled with shelves with folders of papers. It must have been an archive. Lieutenant Valery Vlaskin, the commander of the housekeeping department, and the cook delivered breakfast to the Reichstag. A festive breakfast, said the lieutenant cheerfully. Only then I remembered that today was May 1st. Everyone was in a cheerful, festive mood. Senior Lieutenant Gusev allocated 8 men headed by Private Novikov to familiarize themselves with the Reichstag and make a scheme of it. The scouts went around the whole building, prepared the scheme, wanted to return to the battalion headquarters when they found a door in the wall of the first floor. Opening it, they saw a wide marble staircase with a massive cast iron railing. Cautiously they began to go down. Novikov was the first to go. He was lighting the way with a pocket flashlight. There was dead silence all around, and the clatter of soldiers' boots echoed in it. After passing several flights of stairs and penetrating deep into the dungeon, the soldiers found themselves in a large hall with a reinforced concrete floor and the same walls. No sooner had they gone 10 steps as sounded the explosion of a Faustratron and a machine gun burst. 5 scouts were killed. 3 managed to hide behind the corner of the stairwell. Novikov miraculously survived. With two soldiers barely catching his breath, he ran to the battalion headquarters and told about what had happened. And what is it, the underground? What are the forces of the Nazis there? I was concerned. It was necessary to immediately collect data on the enemy. In one of the rooms of the Reichstag since the evening were captured Hitlerites. We could not send them to the rear, because we did not have time and extra people to accompany them. An Oberleutnant was brought to me. The Hitlerite reported that the underground is large and complex, with all sorts of labyrinths, tunnels and passages, and in it the main forces of the garrison, more than 1,000 people, headed by Lieutenant General of Infantry Commandant of the Reichstag, are placed. In the warehouses are large stocks of food, ammunition and water. If we believe the testimony of the Oberleutnant, the enemy had a serious numerical superiority. Our forces were several times smaller. While I was talking with officers Matveev and Prilov, Kuzma Gusev, leaning over the table, fell asleep. Fatigue was wearing me down, but I braced myself. I walked around the room, clenched my teeth to the point of pain, and thought over the possible variants of the enemy's actions. I assumed different things. But one thing was absolutely clear: do not get into the basement yet, keep the defense upstairs, in the hall, control all the corridors and block the dungeon. I gave orders. Behind the Reichstag, shells and mines began to burst more often. Then the firing turned into a continuous rumble of artillery cannonade. The Reichstag shuddered as if it was continuously shaken. The regimental commander called. He, after the hoisting of the victory banner, went to Himmler's house and was still at the CP, and now congratulated on the holiday of May Day. Having outlined the situation, I asked him to suppress the enemy batteries in the Tiergarten Park, as their supporting artillery was not enough, as well as to deliver more ammunition to the battalion. Informed him also that all necessary measures had been taken to repel probable counterattacks. The enemy artillery fire continued. Soon the Nazis went into a counterattack on the units of the 674th and 380th Rifle Regiments, defending on the outside of the building. Battalions of V, I, Davidov Y, I, Logvinenko and K.Y. Samsonov were concentrated there. Suddenly, somewhere in the depths of the building, heard an explosion, followed by a second, third. Counterattack. To battle. Fire, came the command. Our machine guns and automatic rifles rang out. The Reichstag was filled with the crackle of long and short bursts. Gusev rushed to the telephone to report to the regimental headquarters about the counterattack, but the connection was broken. Restore at any cost. I shouted and ran into the hall to the companies. In the corridor, behind the central hall, I saw Petty Officer Mikhail Ivanovich Dronin lying on the floor. He was badly wounded and bleeding. I took out a bandage bag from his breast pocket and bandaged him. At that time, my new orderly Stepan Ermakov ran up to us instead of the killed Pyatnitsky, and I ordered him to immediately take Dronin to the medical station. Only after 30 years I found out that he was alive, but after the wounding he became a second-group invalid. Health left in the Reichstag. In the room, the bursts of Faust patrons were heard more and more often. But as soon as the Nazis showed themselves in the corridors, the soldiers opened fire, and those leaving the dead retreated to the cellars. Behind the walls of the building, the cannonade was not silent. The battle was going on. There, at the cost of heavy losses, the Nazis managed to squeeze our neighbour and take possession of the Kroll Opera House. This building was to our right in the rear. Thus the lines of communication with the regimental headquarters were interrupted. We were blocked, but at that time we did not know that within 24 hours no one would be able to get through to us in the Reichstag. Our radio was out of order. The telephone was also inoperative. Gusev sent 3 communicators to the line. None of them returned. It was impossible to use the radio of artillery division commanders who were in the Reichstag. They were fighting in the right wing, cut off from the battalion headquarters by the flames of the fire. I learned this after the battle. Their observation posts were attacked by the Nazis. The artillerymen took the fight. They acted as a rifle unit. It came to hand-to-hand combat. By 12 o'clock, Hitlerites again went on a breakthrough. They sought to escape from the dungeon at any cost. In 3 or 4 places they managed to squeeze us, and in this gap on the first floor soldiers and officers of the enemy rushed. Fires broke out in different places from the bursts of Faust patrons, which quickly merged into a continuous curtain of fire. The wooden panelling covered with oil paint, luxurious Seffiano armchairs and sofas, carpets and chairs were burning. There was a fire in the hall, where there were dozens of shelves with archives. The fire, like a tornado, picked up and devoured everything in its path. Already in half an hour the fire raged almost on the entire first floor. Smoke, 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 smoke. It rippled in the air in black waves, enveloped the halls, corridors, rooms in an impenetrable shroud. Only a small part of the smoke went out. People's clothes smouldered, their hair and eyebrows burned, their breath spiraled. The Nazi garrison of the Reichstag were selected thugs, professional killers, war criminals. They, as they say, had nothing to lose. They went straight ahead, determined to restore the situation at any cost to knock us out of the Reichstag. We held back their pressure and made desperate attempts to put out the fire. The fire had already engulfed the upper floors. The battalion was in an extremely difficult situation. We had no communication with neighbouring units. What was going on in the battalions of V.I. Davidov, Y.T.I., Logvinenko and K.Y. Samsonov, we did not know. But the task before us remained the same, not to step back. To hold the Reichstag at all costs, especially now when the victory banner is flying above it. I had to run dozens of times from one company to another, and in companies from one platoon to another. The situation obliged to be where the most threatening situation. Face and hands were covered with burns. The uniforms were burned. I felt like I was about to fall, but people were looking at me. I had to endure. Together with the soldiers of the 1st Company, Fort Political Department of the Division, Captain Matveev and Regimental Agitator Captain Prilov. In one of the corridors they found boxes with Faust patrons. The enemy weapon was immediately put into action. We acquired the skills of using Faust patrons in the days of combat training on Lake Mantel. Now it came in very handy. Until late in the evening of May 1st in the burning Reichstag there was a battle with selected SS units. Only in the night of May 2nd we managed to bypass and attack the Nazis from the rear by a company under the command of Captain Yaronov. Hitlerites did not withstand the onslaught and hid in a dungeon. But our situation remained difficult. People were extremely exhausted. Many of them were wearing burnt rags. Most of the soldiers had burns on their faces and hands. On top of everything else, we were thirsty, running out of ammunition. Suddenly the enemy stopped firing. We were alert. Soon, from behind the turn of the stairs leading to the underground, the Nazis stuck out a white flag. For a moment we looked at it, not believing our eyes. I called Private Prigonov, who knows German, and told him, "Go and find out what this flag means." "Yes, I'm coming." The minutes dragged on for an agonizingly long time. Hiding behind columns and statues, we waited for Prigonov's return. Some thought he was gone forever, others believed he would return. Prigonov returned. He came back with important news: the fascists offered to start negotiations. The shooting stopped on both sides. There was such silence in the building that the slightest knock echoed in the far corners. The Hitlerites made a condition that they would negotiate only with a general, or at least with a colonel. General Shatilov, Colonel Zinchenko. Could I ask them to come to the Reichstag for that? Communication did not work, and in addition, every metre of the Royal Square was shot from the Kroll Opera House. I was looking for a way out, and I came up with something. "Kuzma, get Berest here." The lieutenant's manner of holding himself loosely, with dignity, and his appropriate height always gave him an imposing appearance. Having looked once again from head to toe at our deputy, I thought that he could pass for a colonel. It is only necessary to replace the lieutenant's epaulettes. Never had to be a diplomat. I asked him. On stage, he asked me a counter-question, not knowing what he was talking about. "This time you will have to be a diplomat in life, and also become a colonel for a while, the complex, so to speak, allows. And you have a very thorough look." Alexei Prokopievich was very surprised. He looked at me curiously, waiting for an explanation. I told him my plan. "If necessary, I am ready to go," Berest answered. "There is no other way out. They have expressed a desire to speak at a high level. Quickly shave and take off your lieutenant's epaulets." Berest did not make himself wait long. He immediately took out a small mirror from his field bag, prepared a razor, a brush, poured the last drops of water from a flask, and in a few minutes reported that he was ready for negotiations. "How's it going?" He turned to us. Gusev and I looked critically at Alexei Prokopievich. "Pants should be replaced torn, but it's all right, it's war. We'll replace them afterwards," Gusev joked. "But you should change your overcoat now, and take the cap from Captain Matveev," I suggested. He threw off his overcoat, put on a trophy leather jacket, and put gloves on his hands. Now, it seems, there is nothing to pick on. Patting Berest on the shoulder, I concluded and reminded him that the task is to force the Nazis to unconditionally lay down their arms. "I see." While we were clarifying the last details, Kuzma Gusev came to the machine gun, located at the stairwell, and passed my instructions to Lieutenant Gerasimov at the appearance of Berest to report to him, as a colonel, and very loudly to hear the fascists in the dungeon. Our delegation for negotiations consisted of 3 people: Berest as a colonel, I his adjutant and Prigonov interpreter. During the battle I wore a trolley over my tunic. It was badly burned, wisps of absorbent cotton were sticking out of the holes, but the tunic was preserved underneath. It was almost new, with gold captain's epaulettes, on the chest 5 orders. In appearance, I was the most suitable for the role of adjutant. It would be possible to put my tunic on another man and send him with Berest, but it was against my conscience. I considered myself obliged to share all the dangers, and with Lieutenant Beresta, and with all the other men of the battalion. As soon as we approached the landing, Lieutenant Gerasimov stood up a little and reported at the top of his voice, as he had been ordered to do. "Comrade Colonel, the machine gun company in full strength at the firing position." At that time there was no firing on either side, so Gerasimov's voice echoed through the building. The report sounded natural, and of course the fascists heard it. "Keep your eyes open," the colonel ordered Lieutenant Gerasimov. When we entered the landing, an enemy officer came out to meet us. Putting his hand to his headdress, he briefly but politely indicated where we should go. Without uttering a word, we went downstairs and entered a dimly lighted room, which looked like a casemate. There were already 2 officers and an interpreter representatives of the command of the Nazi garrison of the Reichstag. Behind their backs the defence was taking place. The muzzles of a dozen machine guns and hundreds of automatic rifles were directed at us. A frost ran down my back. The Germans looked at us with hostility. Dead silence settled in the room. Lieutenant Berest took a few steps forward and, breaking the silence, resolutely declared, "All exits from the dungeon are blocked. You are surrounded. If you attempt to break through to the top, each of you will be destroyed. To avoid wasted casualties, I suggest you lay down your arms, while guaranteeing the lives of all your officers and soldiers. You will be sent to the rear of our command." The officer who met us spoke in broken Russian. "The German command is not against surrender, but on condition that you take your soldiers from their firing positions and disarm them for a while. They are excited by the fighting and may lynch us. We will go upstairs, check whether the condition is fulfilled, and only then the Reichstag garrison will come out to surrender." We could not agree to such conditions. The Nazis in the dungeon about 1,000, and we are less than 300, exhausted fighters and commanders. Our colonel categorically rejected the fascists' proposal. He continued to insist on his own. "Gentlemen, you have no other choice. If you don't lay down your arms, every last one of you will be destroyed. If you surrender, we guarantee your life." There was silence again. The first to break it was a Hitler. "I'll report your demands to the commandant. We'll give you an answer in 20 minutes. If at that time you do not hang out the white flag, we will start the assault," said Berest. And we left the dungeon. It's easy to say now left the dungeon. But back then, machine guns were staring at our backs. If you hear a knock, even a rustle behind you, it seems that a line is about to sound. The whole world knows that during the war, the Soviet command, driven by a sense of humanity, sent its parliamentarians to the fascists for negotiations. But they did not always return. Many of our parliamentarians were killed. The road out of the dungeon seemed very long, and it had to be travelled with smooth, calm steps. We understood by our behaviour the fascists would judge about those who blocked them. We should pay tribute to Alexei Prokopievich Berest. He walked leisurely, with his head held high. Vanya Prigonov and I accompanied our colonel. Negotiations ended at 4 a.m. Berest, who performed the role, I and Prigonov safely returned to their own. Passed 20 minutes, an hour and a half. The white flag was not hung. It became clear that the Nazis were dragging out the time and still hoped for something. But time worked for those who stormed the Reichstag. To the centre of Berlin continuously pulled up Soviet troops, suppressing the resistance of the last groups of the enemy. The German command was forced to withdraw its artillery from the Tiergarten Park and transfer it to another area. The surviving Nazi batteries left their positions. The shelling of the territory adjacent to the Reichstag almost ceased. The neighbouring units again knocked the Germans out of the Kroll Opera. The communication from the Reichstag to our rear was restored. At that moment, with noise and joyful shouts, a company of the 2nd Battalion sent by the regiment commander rushed to us. It was led by my fellow countrymen Nikolai Samsonov and Lieutenant Grybov. We received ammunition, hot food and water. Meanwhile, Hitlerites still gave no answer to our offer, and it was not felt that they were preparing to surrender as prisoners. At 6 o'clock in the morning of May 2nd, we began preparations for the storming of the underground. There was general excitement in the companies. Someone said, "What if Hitler himself is in the dungeon?" "Hitler? Now we'll go and see," joked in response. We realized that the last hours of the war were coming. Everyone wanted to live to see victory, but everyone knew that the battle was ahead. At the last moment, when I was about to give the command forward, the Nazis threw out a white flag. In the gloomy labyrinths of the huge building, an unusual silence reigned at once. In the central corridor appeared already familiar to us German officer. He asked to summon the colonel. Lieutenant Berest began to fulfill his role for the second time. Their negotiations did not last long. Hitler informed Berest of the decision of his general, the commandant of the Reichstag, to surrender the entire garrison. At the 7th hour of the morning, groups of captured soldiers and officers stretched from the cellars. Their procession was opened by 2 generals. Pale, with sullen faces, they walked slowly with their heads down. Restraining anger, our soldiers looked at the prisoners, with whom they had recently fought not for life, but for death. The fascists came and went in an endless stream. By 7 o'clock in the morning of May 2nd, the remnants of the garrison completely capitulated, and the struggle in the Reichstag stopped. By this time the fire began to subside. Thus ended our last battle in the Great Patriotic War. The last. The 150th Division did not take part in battles anymore. The war was over for us. And in the afternoon of May 2nd, there was another very important event for me. The communists of my battalion in the building of the Reichstag accepted me into the party. Yes, in one of the rooms of the German parliament, where the fascists were planning to become the rulers of the world, a simple guy from the Urals was accepted into the Bolshevik party. Had Hitler even dreamed of such a thing? The presiding officer announced the agenda. The first question was my application for membership in the All-Union Communist Party. Alyosha Berest, the deputy battalion commander, whispered to me, "That's how, Stepan, the Bolsheviks are in the Reichstag." When I was given the floor, I could not say anything from excitement. I started to talk about the morning battle, but I heard. "We know that. Give me your biography." In a minute I gave the whole biography. Then my recommenders came forward: Alyosha Berest, Kuzma Gusov, the regiment's Partorg Yakov Petrovich Krylov. All voted unanimously. for me and for other soldiers of the battalion. Since then, my party experienced the same age as the victory. The result of the battles was summarized in a combat report of the command of our division to General Perevetkin. Everything around was singing and rejoicing. It seemed that the main nature itself welcomed the great triumph of light and justice over the dark forces of the Brown Plague. Soviet soldiers threw their caps in the air and shouted hurrah. They congratulated each other on the victory, hugged, kissed, shook their commanders. Many had tears in their eyes, tears of great joy. I built the battalion, severely thinned its ranks. Many soldiers stood with bandages soaked in blood, smoky, dirty, in torn clothes. But in the eyes of these people shone great human happiness. In the Reichstag, as in a rare museum, continuously arrived representatives of all branches of the troops. The command of our division, 79th Corps, 3rd Shock Army, 1st Belarusian Front visited here. Marshal of the Soviet Union Georgy Zhukov arrived. With him a member of the Military Council of the Front, Lieutenant General Konstantin Fedorovich Telegin. On this event, former military correspondent of the newspaper Pravda Yakov Ivanovich Makarenko in his book White Flags over Berlin, published by the publishing house of the Ministry of Defense of the USSR in 1976, writes as follows. On May 3rd, the commander of the 1st Belarusian Front, Marshal of the Soviet Union Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov, visited the Reichstag. Together with him came the commandant of Berlin, Colonel General N.Z. Bazarin, a member of the Military Council of the Front KF Telegin, a member of the Military Council of the 5th Shock Army Fey Bukov, met in the Reichstag Marshal and his companions Captain Stepan Niestrov. I was lucky enough to be in the Reichstag that day, and I was a witness to this visit. G.K. Zhukov, smiling broadly, carefully read many inscriptions on the walls and columns of the Reichstag and was surprised to look at the ceiling how only the soldiers managed to write their names under the very eaves. Turning to Nestroyev and pointing to the walls of the Reichstag, the Marshal asked, "Your battalion is, of course, in the centre." Captain Nestroyev was embarrassed, but answered cheerfully, "No, Comrade Marshal. We didn't have time." While they were putting out the fire in the Reichstag, people from different units came here to sign. We didn't have enough room. Georgy Konstantinovich smiled and said, "Well, that's no trouble. You have already inscribed your names in history for eternity." Zhukov answered all the questions of the soldiers in detail and thoroughly. It took at least an hour to talk to the soldiers and officers, but Marshal did not spare the time. He loved meetings and conversations with soldiers. The conversation turned out to be meaningful, heartfelt. Before returning to the headquarters, Zhukov and his companions found a more or less free place on the wall of the Reichstag and also left their signatures. Yes, many people left inscriptions on the walls of the Reichstag. They wrote with chalk, charcoal, or even with a bayonet. "We came from Moscow to Berlin." "Ivanov, we are Stalingraders." Gruzdev. I especially remembered one inscription, "Why is the main fascist office in such disorder?" Petty Officer Sandal. The Reichstag was indeed a mess. Dirt, ashes up to the knees. The walls were covered with soot and soot. In the building itself, the crowd was overwhelming. There were photographers, and the soldiers took pictures with their battle friends. They photographed everything: the Reichstag, the square, the tiger, statues. "Friend and friend, I beg you very much, take a picture," an elderly sergeant infantry addressed to a cheerful boy photographer. "Well, take a picture of me, because my wife and children have probably forgotten my appearance. After all, 4 years. There's another soldier here. Take it off, brother. Take a picture here, in front of the Reichstag, or they won't believe in the village that I was here." Photo reporters and correspondents of army and central newspapers with notebooks and cameras went around the Reichstag. They recorded, filmed, asked soldiers and officers to tell about themselves. It seemed that there would be no end to the questions and recordings. My old friend Vasily Sabotin, a correspondent of the division newspaper, was there too. He was in the battalion while we were standing in the Reichstag, almost every day. After the war will be published many of his books written about the events of the last days of the war, about soldiers and officers. In the book How Wars End, he showed well the last battle in the Reichstag. Now rereading written by Vasily Subotin, as if again I see those who took the Reichstag, those to whom on May 1st, 1945, in the churches of America, England and France, served praise prayers. Yes, they did, served the might and glory of the Soviet state. On May 9th, our regiment, like all Soviet people, celebrated Victory Day. The joy we felt at that time cannot be conveyed in words. 3 days later, the 150th Infantry Adritsko Berlin Division of the Order of Kutuzov left Berlin in the area of New Ruppin. Here we camped at the former summer houses of Göring. On the same day we handed over ammunition to the warehouse. Company petty officers had ammunition only for the guards. We had no ammunition. It was strange, unusual for us. I still couldn't believe that the war was over. Every night I dreamt of attacks, bombings, marches. You'd wake up in a cold sweat and not soon go back to sleep. And then you'd dream of war again. I dreamt about the war for many, many years in a row. Even now sometimes you see it, damn it.